The Montana winter of 1887 was a beast, and it was hungry. Snow didn't just fall, it attacked, burying the world in a suffocating white blanket. The wind screamed like a banshee, clawing at any exposed skin with tiny razors of ice. For Eleanor Morgan and her 5-year-old daughter Sarah, this wasn't just a storm, it was a tomb. Their wagon, a pitiful wooden box against the rage of the elements, was stuck fast. The horse, Penny, was bleeding, her leg caught and twisted when the wheel plunged into a hidden ditch. Inside, Eleanor clutched Sarah, their bodies wrapped in a single threadbare blanket. "Just a little further, darling," Eleanor whispered, her own voice a fragile thing against the wind. "Redemption Creek is close." But Sarah didn't answer. She hadn't for an hour. Her small body, which had been shivering violently, was now just still. Too still. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. Their food was gone. The water was frozen solid. The town, their last hope, was a ghost on the horizon. Then, through a brief gap in the swirling snow, she saw it. A light. Not the cluster of lights from a town, but a single, warm yellow glow. A farmhouse. Hope, sharp and painful, pierced through her despair. She could make it. She had to. She gathered Sarah into her arms, the child a dead weight against her chest. She grabbed her satchel, her teaching certificate, her late husband's watch, Sarah's little rag doll. She whispered a promise to the injured horse she was leaving behind, and then she turned toward the light. Every step was a battle. The snow was a greedy monster, sucking her down, trying to swallow her whole. The wind was a bully, shoving her backward. Her lungs burned, her arms screamed, but the light pulled her forward, a beacon, a promise of life. The 20-minute walk felt like an eternity. Sarah had grown so quiet, so limp. Eleanor's own vision was starting to blur at the edges, the cold seeping into her bones, into her very soul. The world tilted sideways. Her knees buckled. As she fell, she twisted her body, shielding Sarah from the impact. The snow was surprisingly soft, like a cold, white bed. Her last thought was of her husband, William. "I'm sorry," she murmured into the endless white. "I tried." Then, through the fog of her fading consciousness, she heard it. Footsteps crunching through the snow. Strong arms were lifting her, lifting Sarah. A deep voice barked out orders she couldn't understand. And then, nothing. Warmth. That was the first thing she felt. A deep, penetrating warmth that felt like a miracle. Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. She was in a bed, a real bed, in a room lit by a crackling fire. But something was wrong. Sarah. Where was Sarah? Panic surged through her, a jolt of pure adrenaline. She tried to sit up, but a wave of pain shot through her exhausted limbs. "Easy now," a deep voice said from beside the bed. "You're safe." She turned. A man sat in a wooden chair, watching her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvering at the temples. His face was weathered, carved by wind and sun, but his green eyes were sharp, intelligent, and wary. "My daughter," Eleanor croaked, her throat raw. "Where is she?" "She's sleeping in the next room," the man said, his voice calm, steady. "She's safe. You were both nearly frozen when my men found you." Relief washed over her, so powerful it left her dizzy. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved our lives." The man just gave a single sharp nod. "Nathaniel Hayes," he said. "This is Evergreen Ranch. You're about 3 miles from Redemption Creek." "Eleanor Morgan," she replied. We were trying to get to town. I'm to be the new schoolteacher." Something flickered in Nathaniel's eyes. Surprise? Recognition? It was gone in an instant. "Rebecca Foster's relation," he stated. It wasn't a question. "She mentioned you were coming." "Yes, she's my mother's cousin," Eleanor said, then trailed off, suddenly aware of how much she was revealing to this stranger, this silent, watchful man. "Rest now," he said, rising from his chair. "Martha will bring you food. We can talk about your journey to town tomorrow." He moved toward the door, his steps sure and quiet. "Mr. Hayes," she called out. "Our horse. She was injured." He paused at the door. My men have retrieved your wagon. The mare is in my stable. Her leg will heal. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He had saved them, tended to their horse, brought in their belongings. He was a good man. So why did she feel a shiver of unease? Why did it feel like he was watching her, weighing her, measuring her against some unknown standard? "I don't know how I'll ever repay you," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. His expression didn't change. "There's no debt," he said, his voice flat. "Anyone would have done the same." He closed the door softly behind him, leaving Eleanor alone with the firelight. But his last words echoed in the quiet room. Anyone would have done the same. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it wasn't true. Nathaniel Hayes was not just any man, and she had a terrible feeling that he knew more about her than he was letting on. The next morning, Eleanor found Sarah sleeping peacefully in the adjoining room. The child's cheeks had regained their color, and her breathing was even. As Eleanor knelt by the bed, stroking her daughter's hair, Sarah's eyes fluttered open. "Mama," she whispered. "I'm here, darling," Eleanor said, her voice choked with relief. "We're safe." A knock at the door brought an older woman with a kind face and silver-streaked hair. "Good morning," she said warmly. "I'm Martha, Dr. Hayes's housekeeper. I've brought you both some breakfast." Eleanor's head snapped up. "Dr. Hayes?" Martha set the tray down. "Oh, he doesn't use the title much anymore. Prefers to be called Mr. Hayes." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "But old habits die hard for us who've known him a long time." A doctor who didn't want to be called a doctor. Another piece of the puzzle that was Nathaniel Hayes. The man who had saved them was more than just a rancher. He was a man with a past he was trying to bury. Later, Eleanor found Nathaniel in his study, a large room lined with books. He stood by a window, looking out at the vast, snow-covered landscape. He was a man who seemed to belong to this wild place, yet there was a stillness about him, a coiled energy that spoke of a different life. "Your housekeeper called you a doctor," Eleanor said, unable to hold back her curiosity. Something shut down in his expression. The warmth, if it had ever been there, vanished completely. "I was a surgeon," he said, his voice clipped. "During the war. That life is behind me." The finality in his tone was a wall, high and impenetrable. He didn't want to talk about it, but Eleanor couldn't help but wonder. What could make a trained surgeon turn his back on his calling and retreat to a remote ranch in the middle of nowhere? He changed the subject abruptly. "The road to town should be clear by midday. I'll have a wagon ready to take you to Rebecca's." He paused, his gaze intense. "The teaching position in Redemption Creek. It's not easy. The school is old. The resources are few." "I'm prepared for the work," Eleanor said, lifting her chin. "I have no doubt," he replied, and for a moment she felt that strange sense of being evaluated again. "I just want to ensure you understand what you're walking into." There was something in his voice, a note of warning that sent another shiver down her spine. It was as if he knew something about Redemption Creek, something about her situation, that he wasn't telling her. Before she could press him, Martha appeared, summoning him to the barn. As he left, Eleanor stood in the quiet study, surrounded by his books and his silence. She couldn't shake the feeling that her rescue had not been random, that Nathaniel Hayes, the reluctant doctor, the solitary rancher, was connected to her in some way she couldn't yet understand, and she wasn't sure if that connection was a lifeline or a trap. Rebecca Foster's boarding house was a welcome sight, a splash of weathered blue against the endless white of the snow. As Nathaniel's wagon pulled up, Rebecca herself burst out of the door, a whirlwind of concern and relief. "Eleanor, thank the Lord!" she cried, enveloping her in a hug. "When you didn't arrive, I feared the worst!" She turned to Nathaniel, who was helping Sarah down from the wagon. "Nathaniel Hayes, saving strays again," she said, her tone teasing but fond. "The town's guardian angel." Nathaniel's face remained a mask of polite indifference. Just fortunate timing, Rebecca, he said, before turning to his ranch hand to unload Eleanor's trunks. He was efficient, detached, eager to be gone. He refused Rebecca's offer of a meal, tipping his hat to Eleanor with a brief, unreadable glance. "Good day, Mrs. Morgan. Miss Sarah." And then he was gone, a solitary figure riding away down the snowy street. "That man," Rebecca sighed, watching him go, "carries the weight of the world on his shoulders." Inside, the boarding house was warm and clean. Rebecca showed them to a small room at the back, simple but private. It felt like a palace after months on the road. As Sarah quietly explored their new space, Rebecca's cheerful demeanor faded, replaced by a gentle concern. "Your letter, it was vague about William's passing," she said softly. "Consumption, you said. The lie. It sat heavy on Eleanor's tongue, a bitter pill she'd had to swallow 100 times. "Yes," she said quietly. "It was quick." "A mercy, then," Rebecca said, squeezing her hand. "Well, you're here now. A new start." She brightened, eager to change the subject. "The school board is anxious to meet you. You should know the town is run more or less by the Blackwoods. George is the mayor, owns the mercantile. His wife, Judith, considers herself the queen of Redemption Creek." Rebecca's tone held a note of warning. "Tread carefully there." "And Mr. Hayes?" Eleanor asked, unable to keep the curiosity from her voice. "What is his place in all this?" "Nathaniel?" Rebecca's eyes twinkled. "He keeps to himself. Evergreen is the biggest ranch in the county. People respect him, but they don't know him. There's a story there, of course." She leaned closer. 7 years ago, he lost his wife and infant son. Scarlet fever. He was a doctor then, you know. A brilliant one. But he couldn't save his own family. A pang of sympathy shot through Eleanor. So they had that in common. A grief so profound it had shattered their lives and set them on a new, unchosen path. "After they died," Rebecca continued, "he gave up his practice in Helena, bought the ranch, and closed himself off from the world. He's a good man, Eleanor. The best. But he's haunted." That night, as Sarah slept, Eleanor lay awake, the pieces of her new life swirling in her mind. A haunted doctor, a powerful family to be wary of, and her own terrible secret, a secret she had to protect at all costs. No one in Redemption Creek could ever know the truth. That William Morgan, her charming, respected husband, hadn't died of consumption. He had taken his own life after gambling away their future, leaving his wife and daughter not just heartbroken, but destitute and shamed. That secret was a poison, and in a small town like Redemption Creek, she knew it could destroy them. Sunday morning brought the scrutiny of the entire town. At church, Eleanor felt 100 pairs of eyes on her and Sarah. After the service, the introductions began, and then came the Blackwoods. George Blackwood was a large man, his importance puffed out in his chest and his booming voice. His wife, Judith, was thin and sharp, her eyes assessing Eleanor with cold disapproval. Their son, Oliver, a boy of about 8, stared at Sarah with open hostility. "So you're the new teacher," Judith said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We require a teacher with a strong moral compass." The veiled insult was clear. A widow, a woman alone, was already suspect. Then Oliver, with the casual cruelty of a child, pointed at Sarah. "Where's your pa?" he demanded. Eleanor's hand tightened on Sarah's shoulder. "Sarah's father passed away," she said, her voice tight. "Consumption, wasn't it?" Judith chimed in, her curiosity morbid and sharp. Before Eleanor had to endure any more, Oliver spoke again, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "My mother says children need a father to grow up proper. Does that mean you won't grow up proper?" Sarah's lip began to tremble. A hot, furious anger surged through Eleanor. But before she could speak, a deep voice cut through the air. "That's quite enough, young man." Nathaniel Hayes stood beside them. He hadn't approached. He had simply materialized. A tall, imposing presence. He looked down at Oliver, his expression stern. "A person's character is not measured by who their parents are, but by how they treat others." Then he did something that stunned the entire churchyard. He knelt, bringing himself down to Sarah's eye level. "Miss Sarah," he said, his voice softer than Eleanor had ever heard it, "don't you worry about what anyone says. You are not alone here. You have your mother, who loves you very much. You have Miss Rebecca. And," he paused, his green eyes meeting hers, "you have me, if you ever need anything at all." He rose, his gaze holding Eleanor's for a moment, an unspoken message passing between them. Then, with a curt nod to the sputtering Blackwoods, he gently guided Eleanor and Sarah away. "Thank you," Eleanor murmured, her heart still pounding. "The boy was out of line," Nathaniel said, his face impassive. But as they parted ways outside the church, he turned to Sarah. "Perhaps, when the weather warms, you might like to visit the ranch. We have a gentle mare named Daisy, and several new kittens in the barn." For the first time in weeks, a genuine flicker of interest lit up Sarah's eyes. She nodded eagerly, and for the first time, Eleanor saw Nathaniel Hayes truly smile. It was a small thing, just a slight curve of his lips, but it transformed his stern face, revealing a glimpse of the man he kept hidden from the world. As he rode away, Rebecca appeared at Eleanor's side. "Well, well," she said, a knowing look on her face. "I don't believe I've ever seen Nathaniel Hayes voluntarily engage in a social conversation at church. Ever." Eleanor felt a blush creep up her neck. He was just being kind. "Nathaniel Hayes doesn't do anything out of mere obligation, my dear," Rebecca said softly. "Remember that." But Eleanor was remembering something else. The way he had stood up for them. The way he had spoken to Sarah with such gentle understanding. For a man who seemed so determined to keep the world at a distance, he had just publicly declared himself their protector. And in the small, insular world of Redemption Creek, she knew that was a dangerous declaration to make. The schoolhouse was a cold, dusty shell, but Eleanor saw its potential. It was more than a job. It was a sanctuary, a place to build a new life. As she and Sarah stood in the empty room, the door creaked open. It was Nathaniel Hayes. "I saw you come in," he said, removing his hat. "Thought you might need some help." He assessed the room with a practical eye. "The stove needs cleaning. The chimney's likely blocked. You'll need firewood." Before Eleanor could protest that she couldn't possibly accept more of his help, Sarah, who was usually so timid, walked right up to him. "Are you a giant?" she asked, her voice small but clear. A flicker of amusement softened Nathaniel's stern features. "Not a giant, Miss Sarah. Just taller than most." "My papa was tall, too," Sarah said, a rare mention of her father. And Nathaniel's response floored Eleanor. Instead of offering awkward condolences, he spoke to Sarah as an equal. "I'm sure he had many fine qualities." "He could whistle," Sarah offered. "An excellent talent," Nathaniel agreed gravely. "I'm afraid I can't whistle at all." A tiny smile touched Sarah's lips. It was the first real smile Eleanor had seen on her daughter's face since William died. A warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't realized she'd been missing. It was hope. "With your permission," Nathaniel said to Eleanor, "I'll send some of my men to get this place in order, and I'll have a cord of firewood delivered." This time, Eleanor didn't refuse, but as he turned to leave, he pulled a small, paper-wrapped package from his coat. "And this is for Miss Sarah." Sarah carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a small wooden whistle, carved in the shape of a bird. "Since you mentioned your father could whistle," Nathaniel explained, "perhaps this can serve until you learn yourself." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. After he left, Sarah put the whistle to her lips and blew. A sweet, clear note filled the dusty schoolroom. It was the sound of a new beginning. Eleanor looked out the window and saw Nathaniel mounting his horse. He glanced back at the schoolhouse, and for a long moment, his eyes met hers through the glass. In that look, something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that went deeper than a simple rescue. He was a man shrouded in mystery, a doctor who wouldn't heal, a loner who kept stepping in to protect them. And Eleanor realized, with a sudden jolt, that she was drawn to that mystery. She wanted to know the man behind the stoic mask, but she had her own mask, her own secrets. And she knew that in a town this small, secrets had a way of coming to light. The first sign of trouble was a cough. Sarah's cough started small, but within a day it had deepened into a frightening, chest-rattling bark. Her forehead was hot to the touch. It wasn't just a cold. This was something else. Soon news spread through town. Other children were sick. The same fever, the same wrenching cough. The town's elderly doctor, Dr. Finch, was overwhelmed. Fear, cold and familiar, gripped Eleanor's heart. She had already lost her husband. The thought of losing Sarah was unbearable. "There's someone else," Rebecca said, her voice low and hesitant. "Someone with more skill than Dr. Finch. But he doesn't practice anymore." Nathaniel Hayes. The decision was instant. "I'm going to him," Eleanor declared. "He values his privacy," Rebecca warned. "He may not." "I don't care!" Eleanor cut her off, her voice sharp with desperation. "My daughter is sick. If he can help her, I'll face his anger." She rode to Evergreen Ranch as if the devil himself were on her heels. She didn't wait for an invitation, pounding on the heavy wooden door with a frantic urgency. When Nathaniel appeared, his face was a storm cloud. "What's happened?" he demanded. "It's Sarah," Eleanor gasped out, words tumbling over each other. "She's burning with fever. She can't breathe properly. Other children are sick, too. Please. Rebecca said you were a doctor." His face closed off, the mask of the remote rancher slamming down. "I'm not a physician, Mrs. Morgan." "Please," she begged, desperation stripping away her pride. "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't afraid for her life." He stood there, frozen, his green eyes a battleground of conflicting emotions. For a terrible moment she thought he would refuse. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a painful past, he turned to his housekeeper. "Martha, prepare my medical bag." The journey back to town was a blur of tense silence. When they reached Sarah's bedside, the rancher vanished, and the doctor emerged. He was confident, efficient, his hands surprisingly gentle as he examined the sick child. "Bronchitis," he diagnosed, his voice grim. "If we don't treat it aggressively, it could become pneumonia." He worked quickly, mixing medicines, issuing instructions. And through it all, Sarah, who was usually so fearful of strangers, watched him with wide, trusting eyes. As he was preparing to leave, having stabilized Sarah for the moment, Eleanor grabbed his arm. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Don't thank me," he said, his voice low and harsh. He pulled his arm away. "I haven't fixed this." Something dark and painful flickered in his eyes. "You have a gift," she had said to him once. He looked at her now, his face a mask of old grief. A gift that failed the ones who mattered most. He turned and left without another word. Eleanor watched him ride away, his back straight and rigid. She was beginning to understand. His refusal to practice medicine wasn't about privacy or pride. It was about pain. A pain so deep it had driven him into exile. And now, for her and for Sarah, he had been forced to confront it. But the mystery was deepening. As he was leaving, he'd asked a strange question. How many children are sick, and where do they live? It wasn't just a doctor's curiosity. He was looking for a pattern. It was as if he suspected this wasn't just a random winter illness. It was something else, something targeted, something sinister. Nathaniel returned the next morning, his face etched with a grim determination. Sarah's fever had broken, but he wasn't satisfied. "The other children," he said, his voice low. "6 of them are sick. All live within a few blocks of the schoolhouse. All of them have the same symptoms." "What are you saying?" Eleanor asked, a new fear creeping in. "I'm saying this isn't a coincidence," he said. "I've seen this before. During the war, an entire platoon got sick. It wasn't the flu. It was the water." His eyes were hard, his jaw tight. "I need to test the well at the school. Until I do, you and Sarah are not to drink from it. No one is." His warning sent a chill down her spine. The school well, a source of life for generations of children. Could it now be a source of poison? Later that week, as Eleanor was preparing the classroom for the start of the term, she saw 3 boys playing at the very pump Nathaniel had warned her about. She rushed outside. "Boys, you can't drink that water," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "It might not be safe." The oldest boy, Daniel Miller, wiped his mouth. "But we always drink from here." "Has anyone in your family been sick?" Eleanor pressed. "My little brother, Thomas," Daniel said. "He was real sick last week. Dr. Hayes came and gave him some awful-tasting medicine. Said it would make his chest stop hurting." Dr. Hayes. The boy used the title so naturally. "Pa says Dr. Hayes was a real army doctor," Daniel added, his eyes wide with hero worship. "Saved hundreds of men." Another piece of the puzzle fell into place, but it only raised more questions. A war hero, a brilliant surgeon. What had happened to break him so completely? Returning to the schoolhouse, she found Sarah drawing on her slate. It was a picture of a large house, with a tall man, a woman, and a small girl standing in front. "That's Mr. Hayes's ranch," Sarah explained. "And that's him, and you, and me." Eleanor stared at the drawing, a strange tightness in her chest. "Why did you draw that, sweetheart?" "Because he makes you smile," Sarah said with the simple, devastating honesty of a child. "Not a big smile, a little one, like when Papa used to bring you flowers." The comparison to William was a physical blow. Before she could process it, the schoolhouse door swung open. It was Judith Blackwood. Her eyes swept the room, cold and critical. "I see you've been busy," she said. Then her gaze landed on Eleanor. "I understand Nathaniel Hayes has taken quite an interest in your welfare." The insinuation was as sharp as a slap. "He's been assisting with repairs," Eleanor said, her voice stiff. Judith's lips curved into a cruel smile. "How fortunate for you to receive such personal attention from our town's most eligible bachelor." She leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. "A word of advice, Mrs. Morgan. Men like Nathaniel Hayes do not trifle with women like you. Whatever you think is happening, you're mistaken." She left as quickly as she had appeared, leaving a trail of poison in the air. Eleanor stood frozen, her cheeks burning. It was clear now. Her connection with Nathaniel, however new and undefined, had made her an enemy, and Judith Blackwood was not an enemy to be taken lightly. But what was even more terrifying was the thought that Judith might be right. What if she had misread everything? What if Nathaniel's kindness was just pity? Or worse, what if it was all part of some plan she couldn't yet see? The first day of school was a trial by fire. 15 students, ranging in age from 5 to 15, all watching her with a mixture of curiosity and defiance. Oliver Blackwood sat in the middle of the room, a smirk already on his face. When it was Sarah's turn to introduce herself, she stood, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm Sarah. I like kittens." "And she ain't got no paw," Oliver sneered, just loud enough to be heard. A wave of protective fury washed over Eleanor. But before she could discipline the boy, the oldest girl in the class, Clara Thompson, turned in her seat and fixed Oliver with a withering glare. "Hush your mouth, Oliver Blackwood," she said, her voice sharp. "Not everyone is as lucky as you." Oliver, stunned into silence by the public rebuke from an older student, shrank in his seat. Eleanor gave Clara a grateful look. She had an ally. That afternoon, Rebecca stopped by with a basket of food. "Clara told me what happened," she said, her eyes twinkling. "She also told me something else. She saw Nathaniel Hayes ride past the schoolhouse this morning. Twice." Eleanor felt that familiar blush. "He's watching over you," Rebecca said gently. "And it's making Judith Blackwood furious. Word is, she was trying to match him with her niece from Helena." The pieces were starting to connect. Judith's hostility wasn't just about social standing. It was about jealousy. Just then, the door opened. It was Nathaniel. He looked from Eleanor to Rebecca, a hint of hesitation in his eyes. Rebecca, with a mischievous smile, made a quick exit. "I came to see how your first day went," he said. "But also, I got the results from the water test." His face was grim. "It's contaminated. Mineral runoff. From Blackwood's new mine north of town." Eleanor gasped. "That's what's making the children sick." "I believe so," he said, his jaw tight. "I've tried to talk to him, but he dismisses my concerns. He's putting profit ahead of the health of this town's children." He began to pace, his contained energy now a restless anger. "This isn't the first time I've seen this. During the war, a mining company, they poisoned a creek. 50 of my men fell ill before we found the source." He was opening up to her, sharing a piece of his painful past. He trusted her. "What can we do?" she asked. "For now, I've had clean water brought from my ranch. It's in barrels behind the schoolhouse. Use only that." He stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes intense. "But this is not a permanent solution. Blackwood has to be stopped." Suddenly Sarah, who had been quietly listening, tugged on his coat. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "you promised I could see the kittens." The abrupt change of subject seemed to startle him. He looked down at Sarah's hopeful face, and the hard lines of his own softened. "So I did," he said. "Perhaps this Sunday, after church, if your mother agrees." He looked at Eleanor, a question in his eyes. A visit to his ranch would be fodder for the town gossip mill for weeks. It would be a direct challenge to Judith Blackwood. But looking at Sarah's excited face, Eleanor knew she couldn't say no. "We'd love to," she said. As he was leaving, Sarah did something that surprised them both. She threw her arms around his legs in a fierce hug. For a moment, Nathaniel froze, looking utterly lost. Then, awkwardly, he patted her on the shoulder. Over her head, his eyes met Eleanor's, and in them she saw a flicker of something she hadn't seen before. Not pity, not obligation. It was a raw, unguarded vulnerability. A longing. That night, as she tucked Sarah into bed, her daughter's words echoed in her mind. "Do you think Mr. Hayes is lonely?" Yes, Eleanor thought. He was desperately lonely, and she was beginning to realize that she was too. But their budding connection was built on a foundation of secrets, his and hers. And now they had a powerful enemy who would stop at nothing to tear them apart. This wasn't just about gossip anymore. It was about a poisoned well, sick children, and a corrupt mayor. Nathaniel wasn't just watching over her, he was fighting a war, and he had just pulled her and Sarah onto the battlefield. Sunday at Evergreen Ranch was like stepping into another world, a world of warmth and peace, far from the prying eyes of Redemption Creek. Nathaniel, away from the town, seemed like a different man. He was still quiet, but the rigid tension was gone from his shoulders. He and Eleanor sat in his study while Sarah was happily occupied with fresh-baked cinnamon rolls in the kitchen with Martha. "I understand now why you came here," Eleanor said softly, gesturing to the vast, quiet landscape outside the window. After you lost your family." His face clouded with the familiar shadow of grief. "Helena was full of ghosts," he said. "I needed a place where the silence wasn't filled with memories." "I understand," she replied, thinking of St. Louis. "Sometimes the memories are the hardest part to leave behind." A look of shared understanding passed between them. They were two wounded souls, each scarred by loss, who had somehow found each other in this remote corner of the world. Later, in the barn, Nathaniel placed a tiny gray ball of fluff into Sarah's cupped hands. The look of pure, unadulterated joy on her daughter's face made Eleanor's heart ache. "He's purring," Sarah whispered in awe. "She has a gentle touch," Nathaniel observed quietly to Eleanor. "She's always loved animals," Eleanor said, a bittersweet memory of William surfacing. "He used to say she'd fill our house with strays if she had the chance." "Would you permit her to keep one?" Nathaniel asked. "When they're old enough. It would be my gift." The offer, so simple, so thoughtful, touched Eleanor more than any grand gesture could have. This man, this quiet, wounded man, kept finding ways to bring light back into her daughter's life, and into hers. The afternoon was idyllic. Nathaniel lifted Sarah onto the back of a gentle mare named Daisy and led her around the corral. Sarah's laughter, a sound Eleanor hadn't heard in so long, echoed in the crisp air. Leaning against the fence, watching them, Eleanor felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked her off her feet. Gratitude, joy, and something else. Something warm and fluttering in her chest that she hadn't felt since before William's illness, before the lies and the debts had poisoned their marriage. It was a dangerous feeling. To let herself care for someone again was to risk everything, especially with the secret she was hiding. As they were preparing to leave, Nathaniel walked her to the buggy. "Thank you for today," she said. "Sarah hasn't been this happy in a very long time." "She's a remarkable child," he said. "You've raised her well." He paused, his gaze searching her face. "I hope you'll choose to stay in Redemption Creek." "I think we will," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The next morning, the peace was shattered. Mayor Blackwood was waiting for her at the schoolhouse, his face a mask of fury. "I understand you are using water delivered from Evergreen Ranch," he boomed, his voice an accusation. "I want it to stop. You will use the school well." "Mr. Hayes has concerns about the water quality," Eleanor said, standing her ground. "Hayes and his ridiculous theories," Blackwood spat. "He is trying to undermine my mining operation." "You are a school teacher, Mrs. Morgan. I suggest you stick to teaching and stay out of matters that do not concern you. The school board meets next week. I would hate for your position to be reviewed." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Comply or be cast out. She would lose everything. Her job, her home, the fragile stability she had fought so hard to build. She was trapped. That night, Nathaniel came to Rebecca's. He had received the frantic note she had sent with Clara Thompson. "Blackwood threatened you," he said, his voice a low growl. It wasn't a question. "He wants me to use the well water," she said, her voice trembling. "Nathaniel, I can't. I can't risk the children's health." "Nor should you," he said grimly. "I've sent the water samples to a lab in Helena, but we need to buy time." He looked at her, his eyes dark with a cunning she hadn't seen before. "We have to be smarter than him. We fight him not in the open, but in the shadows." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting a temporary deception," he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "During the war, I once smuggled medical supplies past enemy lines by hiding them in coffins. Sometimes, to uphold a principle, you have to break a few rules." The glimpse into his past, the ruthless pragmatism beneath the quiet exterior, was both thrilling and terrifying. "Continue to use the water I've provided," he instructed. "But be discreet. If he asks, tell him you're complying. It's a lie, yes, but it's a lie to protect children. I think God will forgive us." He was about to leave, then he turned back. "There's a winter dance at the Grange Hall in 2 weeks," he said, a strange hesitation in his voice. "I would be honored if you and Sarah would attend. With me." An invitation to a dance, a public declaration. In the midst of their secret war with Blackwood, he was asking her to step into the light with him. "It would be wise," he argued, seeing her hesitation, "to show the town we are not intimidated, to show them we are part of this community." It was a strategic move, but Eleanor knew it was more than that. The way he looked at her, the hope warring with fear in his eyes. It was personal. She was standing on the edge of a precipice. Saying yes would mean defying the most powerful man in town and embracing a future with a man she was only beginning to understand. A man who was starting to feel dangerously like home, but home was built on trust, and she was still living a lie. The night of the dance was electric with tension. When Eleanor and Sarah walked into the Grange Hall on Nathaniel's arm, a hush fell over the room. Every eye was on them. It was a scandal, a declaration, and a spectacle all in one. Judith Blackwood watched them from across the room, her eyes narrowed to poisonous slits. But for the first time, Eleanor didn't care. With Nathaniel by her side, she felt a strength she hadn't known she possessed. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer, holding her with a respectful confidence that made her feel safe, cherished. In the warm glow of the lanterns, with the sound of the fiddle music swirling around them, it was easy to forget the danger they were in, to forget the secrets that lay between them. For a few hours, they were just a man and a woman, finding a fragile happiness against all odds. But the real world came crashing back in with the force of a physical blow. The next morning, the news spread through Redemption Creek like a wildfire. Nathaniel Hayes had been arrested. He had been found trespassing at the Blackwood mine in the middle of the night. The charge was sabotage. He was accused of trying to destroy the very mine he had claimed was poisoning the town's children. Eleanor's world tilted on its axis. It was a lie, a setup. Blackwood was framing him. She rushed to the marshal's office but was denied a visit. She was left standing on the street, her mind reeling. What had he been doing at the mine? And how could she prove his innocence when the entire town was already convinced of his guilt? She knew with a sickening certainty that this was about more than just the mine. Blackwood wasn't just trying to silence a critic. He was trying to eliminate a threat. But what was the threat? What did Nathaniel know that made him so dangerous to the mayor? The answer, she suspected, lay buried in the past, in Nathaniel's and in her own. Desperate, she remembered the medical bag Nathaniel had left at Rebecca's. With trembling hands, she opened it. It felt like a violation, but Rebecca's words spurred her on. If he's protecting you, don't you deserve to know from what? Beneath a false bottom, she found it. A worn leather journal. The first page stopped her breath. Property of Dr. Nathaniel Hayes, 47th Regiment, Union Army Medical Corps. She flipped through the pages, her heart pounding. Medical notes, case histories, and then a name that made her blood run cold. October 17th, 1864, CPL. William Morgan admitted with gunshot wound to the shoulder. Patient is in good spirits, speaks often of his wife, Eleanor. William, her William. He had been Nathaniel's patient during the war. They had known each other. All this time, Nathaniel had known who she was. Their meeting in the blizzard. It hadn't been a coincidence at all. But the final discovery was the one that shattered her world. Tucked into the back of the journal was a letter. The handwriting was William's, and it was addressed to Nathaniel. "My dear friend," it began. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. The men to whom I owe money, they will not stop. They will come for my family. You once saved my life on a battlefield. I am asking you now to save my family's future. Find them. Protect them. Their lives are in your hands. Chief among my creditors is a man named George Blackwood, who now operates in the Montana Territory." The letter fell from her trembling fingers. The truth, in all its devastating complexity, was laid bare. Nathaniel hadn't come to Redemption Creek by chance. He had come looking for her. He had been watching over them, protecting them, fulfilling a promise to a dying friend. Every act of kindness, every quiet gesture of support had been part of this secret mission. He had been carrying this burden alone, all to protect her from a past she thought she had escaped. Suddenly, Sarah was there, her small face creased with worry. "Mama, why are you crying?" In her arms, Sarah clutched the old rag doll William had given her. "Papa said Mrs. Button would keep me safe," she said. Then she confided a secret. "She has a pocket for treasures." She turned the doll over and pulled a folded, yellowed piece of paper from a hidden slit in the seam. It was another letter from William, addressed to Sarah. With a shaking voice, Eleanor read it aloud. It spoke of his love, his regrets, and his failings. And then, the final stunning piece of the puzzle. "If someday a man named Nathaniel Hayes comes into your life, trust him. He is the finest man I have ever known. He showed me what it means to live with honor." The next morning, Eleanor walked into the marshal's office, Sarah's hand held tightly in hers. She faced Nathaniel through the bars of his cell. "We know everything," she said, her voice quiet but strong. When the circuit judge arrived, the town hall was packed. The hearing was a storm of revelations. Billy Wilson, the mayor's own nephew, testified that Nathaniel had been framed. The documents Nathaniel had found in the mine office proved Blackwood's criminal connections and his ongoing scheme to extort William Morgan's estate. And then, Eleanor took the stand. She told the town the truth, the whole truth, about William's suicide, the gambling debts, and the lie she had maintained to protect her daughter. The verdict was swift. Nathaniel was exonerated. George Blackwood was arrested. In the stunned silence of the courtroom, Nathaniel walked to Eleanor's side. The secrets were gone. The lies were gone. All that was left was the truth. "You're free now, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You and Sarah, truly free." "Thanks to you," she whispered. "What I did," he said, his green eyes searching hers. "It stopped being about a promise to William the moment I found you in the snow." That spring, on a sun-drenched afternoon at Evergreen Ranch, Nathaniel Hayes asked Eleanor Morgan to be his wife, and in front of the little white church in Redemption Creek, surrounded by the friends who had become their family, she said yes. The journey had started in a blizzard, in desperation and fear. It had led them through a web of secrets and lies, of danger and betrayal. But they had found their way through the storm. Together, they had found their way home. A promise made in the shadow of death had blossomed into a love that was stronger than any secret. And in the quiet peace of the Montana frontier, a new family was born, built not on the ghosts of the past, but on the bright, hopeful promise of the future. If you enjoyed this story of secrets uncovered and justice served, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. You never know what mysteries are waiting to be solved in the next video.